You wake up, but it's not your world anymore. The air feels heavier, warmer, touched by dust and distance. The year is 92 BCE, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, empires are already moving against each other. Even if they don't yet realize Tio the West, Rome is rising like a slow, unstoppable tide. It hasn't yet become an empire in name, but in power, in ambition, in sheer momentum, it already is one. Carthage is gone, crushed. Greece has bent the knee. The Mediterranean is no longer a sea of rivals. It is becoming a Roman lake. And yet, for all its strength, Rome is still looking inward, still tangled in its own politics, its own rivalries, its own hunger for power. It does not yet fully see what waits in the east. Because to the east, something else is rising, beyond the familiar cities of Syria, beyond the old kingdoms left behind by Alexander the Great, beyond the fading ghost of the Seleucid Empire. There is a different kind of power-taking. Shape, Parthia, not a kingdom built on marble cities and philosophical debates, but on movement, on speed, on survival. Its people are riders first, rulers second. They come from the Iranian plateau, from lands where the wind never seems to stop and the horizon stretches endlessly in every direction. They're not like the Romans, where Rome builds roads, Parthia rides across open ground. Where Rome drills its soldiers into disciplined formations, Parthia teaches its warriors to move like flowing water, never fixed, never trapped. And their most feared weapon is not a sword or a spear, but a moment that a rider fleeing at full speed, turning his body, drawing his bow, and releasing an arrow backward with deadly precision. The Parthian shot.it is not just a tactic. It is a message. You cannot catch what refuses to stand still. And slowly, quietly, almost invisibly at first, Parthia begins to grow, not through reckless conquest, but through careful expansion. A city here, an alliance there, a rival weakened, a border secured. Brick by brick, it becomes an empire. Between Rome and Parthia lies a region that has seen empires rise and fall for centuries. Syria, Mesopotamia, the lands between the great rivers. It is a crossroads of trade, culture, religion, and sooner or later, conflict. But in 92 BCE, there is no war. Not yet. Instead, there is something far more subtle than a meeting. Near the banks of the Euphrates River, a Roman envoy arrives. His name is Sulla. Not yet the infamous dictator he will become, not yet the man who will march on Rome itself, but already ambitious, already dangerous in that quiet, calculating way. Across from him stand a representative of Parthia and armies behind them. No battle lines drawn, just two men, two worlds, facing each other for the first time. They speak politely, carefully, each word measured, each gesture deliberate. And between them flows the Euphrates. Wide, steady, ancient it becomes, without ceremony, without ink or signatures, a boundary. Rome will stay to the west. Parthia will remain to the east. For now, it is not a treaty. It is not peace. It is an understanding. But even in that moment, something unspoken lingers in the air, because both sides know this is not permanent. Borders like this are never permanent. Not when ambition is involved. Not when pride is involved. Not when two powers are still growing. And while Rome turns its attention back to its internal struggles and Parthia watches its own eastern frontiers, something else begins to shift in the north that in the rugged highlands of Armenia. A king is rising. Not just any king, a king who will not accept being caught between empires, a king who intends to become one himself. His name is Tigranes. And he is about to pull Rome and Parthia closer to war than either of them expected. The quiet understanding at the Euphrates does not last long, because history has a way of refusing stillness. In the mountains to the north, stillness was never an option. Armenia was not meant to be the center of the world. It was meant to be a buffer, a space between empires, a land that bent whichever way the stronger power pushed. For years, it had existed exactly like that, caught between influence shaped by others, but then came a man who refused to bend, Tigranes, that he had not always been powerful. In fact, his early life was marked by humiliation. For years, he lived as a hostage in Parthia, a political guarantee, a reminder that Armenia existed at the mercy of greater powers. He watched, he learned, and most importantly, he remembered, because when he was finally released and allowed to return to Armenia, he did not come back as a submissive king, that he came back with a vision. And that vision was not survival that IT was dominance, that IT first, Parthia saw him as useful. They had helped place him on the throne, expecting loyalty, perhaps even dependence. And for a time, that's exactly what they received. Tigranes paid tribute. He played the role. But slowly, carefully, he began to change the game. He expanded his influence outward, first into nearby regions, then deeper into lands that once belonged to the dying Seleucid Empire. Cities that had once answered to Greek kings now found themselves under Armenian control. Syria, Phoenicia, parts of Anatolia. One by one, they fell into his orbit. And unlike the fragmented rulers before him, Tigranes didn't just conquer, that he created a new capital, Tigranocerta, a city designed not just to function, but to impress. A statement carved into the land itself. Its streets filled with merchants, scholars, soldiers. Its courts alive with multiple languages, multiple cultures. That it was a place where Greek philosophers debated under eastern skies, where Persian nobles shared space with Mediterranean traders, where ambition was not hidden, but displayed. Tigranes began calling himself something bold, King of Kings, not as a boast, as a declaration. And that declaration sent ripples across the region of the Parthians. It was a warning. The man they had once elevated was no longer under their influence. He was becoming something else, something unpredictable to the Romans. It was a problem waiting to happen, because Rome had its own ambitions in the east, even if it hadn't fully committed to them yet. It had influence in Asia Minor, allies scattered across the region, and an expectation that no single power should rise too high beyond its reach. Tigranes was rising too high. And then, as if tension needed a spark, it found one. His name was Mithridates. Mithridates VI of Pontus was not the kind of man who accepted defeat quietly. He was cunning, charismatic, and absolutely relentless in his hatred of Rome. Years earlier, he had already challenged Roman power in Asia Minor, even orchestrating a massacre of Roman citizens in what became known as the Asiatic Vespers. Thousands killed in a coordinated strike, that a message written in blood. Rome had responded, of course. It always did. The general Sulla, the same man who once stood at the Euphrates, marched east and forced Mithridates into submission. But submission was not the same as surrender. Mithridates waited. He rebuilt. He planned. And most importantly, he looked for allies. That he found one in Tigranes, not just as a political partner, but as family. The two were bound through marriage, linking their ambitions together in a way that made separation almost impossible. When Mithridates rose again in defiance of Rome, he did not stand alone. And this time, Rome could not ignore it. The Senate, already strained by internal conflict, sent forces east once more. War returned to Asia Minor, but it was no longer a contained conflict. It was spreading, pulling in more players, stretching further across the map. And while Rome fought Mithridates, something important happened. Tigranes kept expanding. That he took advantage of the distraction, pushing deeper into former Seleucid lands, strengthening his position, building his empire into something that now stood uncomfortably close to both Roman and Parthian spheres. He was no longer just a regional king, that he was a rival to both sides. And that changed everything, because now Parthia began to reconsider its position. Tigranes was no longer useful, that he was dangerous. And Rome began to see something unexpected. Not a direct enemy in Parthia, but a potential counterbalance. For the first time, quietly, cautiously, without trust, but with shared interest, Rome and Parthia began to circle the same problem. Tigranes, that it was an alliance. Not even close. But it was the beginning of something new. A realization that sometimes the enemy of your enemy isn't your friend, but might still be useful. Meanwhile, the lands between empires, The deserts, the rivers, the caravan routes began to change. Merchants whispered of growing armies. Cities watched their rulers shift loyalties. Envoys traveled faster, their messages more urgent. And somewhere in all of this, the Euphrates no longer felt like a boundary that it felt like a line waiting to be crossed, because Rome was no longer just reacting to it was preparing. And soon, a new general would arrive in the east, and a man who would not just fight wars, but redraw the entire map. Why now? The east is no longer a distant concern for Rome. It is no longer a place of rumors, maps, and secondhand reports. It is real. It is active, and it is unstable. And into that instability steps a man who is not loud, not reckless, but dangerously capable. Lucius Licinius Lucullus. He is not the kind of general who inspires immediate fear with his presence. He doesn't carry the raw intensity of men like Sulla, nor the larger-than-life charisma of those who will come after him. But what he does have is something just as powerful: control over logistics, over movement, over timing. And in war, those things decide everything. When he arrives in the east, his mission is clear: finish what Rome started with Mithridates and no more half measures. No more temporary victories. End it. And at first, it seems almost easy. Lucullus moves quickly, striking with precision. Mithridates, despite all his preparation, finds himself outmaneuvered again. His forces are pushed back, broken, scattered. And just like before, he runs. But this time, he doesn't flee to the sea, that he flees to Tigranes. And that changes everything. Because when Mithridates crosses into Armenia, he is no longer just a defeated king seeking refuge. He becomes a test for the question: will Tigranes protect him or surrender him? For Tigranes, the answer is not simple. On one hand, Mithridates is family, an ally, a symbol of resistance against Rome. On the other, he is trouble. Keeping him means inviting Rome into Armenia. Handing him over means showing weakness. And Tigranes is not a man who shows weakness as he refuses. And with that single decision, the war shifts. Rome is no longer fighting in Asia Minor. Rome is going deeper. For the first time, Roman legions will march into Armenia itself. It is a bold move, a dangerous move. And Lucullus does not hesitate. In 69 BCE, he leads his army across difficult terrain, pushing into lands that are unfamiliar, harsh, and unforgiving. This is not the Mediterranean world the Romans understand. This is something else entirely: mountains, cold winds, long supply lines stretching thinner with every step. But still, they advance because Rome does not turn back. Not yet. Tigranes is caught off guard. For all his power, for all his ambition, he did not expect Rome to come this far, this fast. His forces are large, but not fully prepared. His empire, though vast, is not yet stable. And so, instead of meeting Lucullus head-on immediately, he pulls back, and that leaves something exposed: his greatest creation, Tigranocerta. The city that was meant to symbolize his power now becomes a target. Lucullus moves in. The siege begins inside the city. There is tension, fear, uncertainty. This is not an old capital with deep loyalty. Many of its inhabitants were relocated there by Tigranes, brought from conquered lands. Their loyalty is fragile. Outside, the Roman army prepares, disciplined, focused, patient. And then Tigranes returns with a massive force. Ancient sources exaggerate the numbers, as they always do, but there is no doubt his army is far larger than Lucullus' smaller, hardened force than on paper. This should be an easy victory for Tigranes. Overwhelm the Romans. Crush them with numbers. In the invasion. But war is not fought on paper. It is fought in moments. In decisions. In discipline. And in that, Rome still has the advantage. When the battle comes, Lucullus does something unexpected. He doesn't wait to be surrounded. He doesn't stay defensive. He attacks. Fast. Direct. Precise. Roman troops exploit weaknesses in Tigranes' lines, targeting less experienced units, creating confusion, breaking cohesion. The Armenian army, large but uneven, begins to falter. And once it falters, it collapses. What should have been a decisive Armenian victory turns into a shocking defeat. Tigranocerta falls. The city is taken. Tigranes escapes. And for a moment, it looks like Rome has done the impossible. They have marched into the heart of a rising empire and broken it. But that moment doesn't last. Because winning a battle is not the same as winning a war. And Lucullus is about to learn that the hard way. Armenia is. Not like the lands Rome is used to controlling. You cannot simply take the capital and expect everything else to fall in line. The land itself resists you. Tigranes retreats into the mountains, into terrain that favors him, not Rome. His forces regroup. His authority, though shaken, is not gone. And meanwhile, the Roman army begins to feel the strain. Long campaigns, harsh conditions, endless marching, supply issues, and something even more dangerous than the enemy, fatigue. The soldiers begin to question, why are we here? How far does this go? Lucullus tries to push further, deeper into Armenian territory, but momentum is slipping. His victories are no longer clean. His army is no longer as willing. And back in Rome, politics begin to creep in. Rivals whisper, critics speak louder, and one name begins to rise above the rest. Pompey, to a man who understands something crucial that in Rome, it's not enough to win. You have to be seen winning. And Lucullus, despite his brilliance, is starting to lose that image. Slowly, almost quietly, control of the Eastern campaign begins to shift. Not because Lucullus failed completely, but because Rome is never satisfied with almost. And as he struggles to hold what he has taken, another force continues to watch from the east. Patient, calculating, unmoved. Parthia, they have not intervened. Not yet, but they are learning, watching how Rome fights, watching how Rome struggles, and understanding something important. The Romans are powerful, but they are not unstoppable, and soon someone in Rome will decide to test Parthia directly. Not with caution, not with patience, but with ambition. The kind of ambition that doesn't just risk defeat, but disaster. Rome does not like unfinished wars, and it certainly does not like the feeling that something is slipping out of its control. So when Lucullus' campaign begins to stall, when victories no longer feel decisive and the army grows restless, the Senate does what it often does in moments like this. It turns to a man who promises clarity, speed, and results, and that man is Pompey. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, a name already heavy with victories before he even steps into the Eastern theater, a man who has crushed pirates across the Mediterranean, defeated enemies in Spain, restored order where there was chaos, and perhaps most importantly, a man who knows how to turn success into power, how to make Rome see him not just as a general, but as the solution. When he arrives in 66 BCE, he doesn't inherit a clean battlefield, he inherits a tangled mess of shifting loyalties, wounded kingdoms, unfinished wars, and a region that has grown used to instability, but where? Lucullus struggled to maintain momentum. Pompey accelerates it, that he moves fast, but not recklessly. He understands that war here is not just about battles. It is about removing problems one by one until nothing remains to resist. Mithridates is the first, the old enemy of Rome, stubborn, relentless, a king who has spent years refusing to accept defeat, but time is no longer on his side. Pompey hunts him down with calculated pressure, cutting off his options, forcing him further and further into isolation until finally, in a remote fortress with no escape left, Mithridates does what so many cornered rulers do. He takes his own life, just like that. One of Rome's longest enemies is gone. No grand final battle, no dramatic last stand, just the quiet end of a man who had once shaken the Roman world. Then comes Tigranes. But this time, there is no great clash, no desperate resistance, because Tigranes understands something now that he did not before. He has seen what Rome can do. He has seen how quickly things can turn, and more importantly, he has already lost enough that SO when Pompey approaches. Tigranes does something unexpected. He submits, not completely, not in humiliation, but in calculation. He keeps his throne, but as a client king of Rome, his power reduced, his independence limited, his ambition contained, And just like that, without another massive war, Pompey stabilizes one of the most dangerous regions in the east. It is efficient. Almost surgical point, one enemy removed, another neutralized. But now, the map looks different, because now, for the first time, Rome stands face to face with something it has not yet truly confronted. Parthia. Not through proxies, not through shifting alliances, but directly. And Pompey understands the weight of that. He is not reckless. He knows that this is not a war to rush into, not an enemy to underestimate. So instead of marching east with legions, he does something far more careful, that he talks. Diplomats move between Rome and the Parthian court. Messages carried across the Euphrates, each side measuring the other, testing boundaries without crossing them. And in 64 BCE, an understanding is reached, not friendship, not alliance, but something practical. The Euphrates will remain the line. Rome stays to the west. Parthia stays to the east. For now, it is the same river, the same boundary that Sulla once stood beside decades earlier. But now it feels different, heavier, more real, because now both sides know exactly what stands on the other side. And still, Pompey makes one more move, that a decisive one. In 63 BCE, he formally annexes Syria. The last remnants of the Seleucid world are gone, absorbed into Rome completely. No more buffer. No more fading Greek kingdom in between. Now, Rome and Parthia share a direct border, no distance, no separation. Just a river, and rivers can be crossed. Parthia watches all of this carefully. Its king, Oro II, rules from deep within the empire, balancing powerful noble families, managing internal tensions, maintaining control over a system that is far less centralized than Rome's, but no less dangerous. Because Parthian kings do not rule alone. They rule with the constant pressure of powerful clans who can turn on them at any moment. And soon, that pressure becomes something more. Because while Rome is stabilizing its frontier, Parthia begins to fracture from within. That Oro's own sons begin to move against him, ambition turning inward, power becoming a family matter. And in 57 BCE, the situation explodes. The king is killed. Not by Rome, not by an invading army, but by his own blood. What follows is chaos, brothers fighting brothers, claims and counterclaims, a throne that no longer feels secure. And one of those sons, Mithridates, loses the struggle. But instead of disappearing, he runs. Not east, not deeper into Parthia, he runs west to Rome. And suddenly, the balance shifts again. Because now a Parthian prince stands in Roman territory, asking for help to reclaim his throne, offering an opportunity that Rome has never had before, a chance to interfere directly in Parthian affairs. Not through war, but through influence. And the man who sees that opportunity most clearly is not Pompey, not why it is another Roman, one who has been watching, waiting, measuring his moment. Marcus Licinius Crassus, that he is not like Pompey, that he is not like Caesar, he is not remembered for brilliant victories or legendary campaigns, but he has something else. Wealth. More wealth than almost anyone in Rome, and ambition to match it. Because in Rome, power is a balance. And Crassus knows that he stands in the shadow of men like Pompey and Julius Caesar, men who have earned glory on the battlefield, men whose names are spoken with admiration and fear. Crassus wants that, he needs that. And when Mithridates of Parthia asks for help, Crassus sees more than a request. He sees a path, that a war, that a victory waiting to be claimed, a chance to step out of the shadow and become something greater. But there is one problem: he does not understand the enemy he is about to face. Because Parthia is not like the kingdoms Rome has defeated before, that it does not fight the same way, that it does not break the same way, and the land itself does not forgive mistakes. Still, in 54 BCE, Crassus makes his decision. He gathers his legions, that he crosses the Euphrates, and without fully realizing it, he walks straight into one of the greatest disasters in Roman history. Crassus does not hesitate, and that is the first mistake, because hesitation might have forced him to ask questions, might have made him listen, might have slowed him down just enough to understand the land he was about to enter, but he does none of that. Instead, he moves forward with confidence, with certainty, with the belief that what worked for Rome everywhere else will work here. 2.7 legions march with him, tens of thousands of soldiers, disciplined, experienced, carrying the weight of Rome's reputation on their shoulders. And to them, this campaign does not feel like a risk. It feels like another conquest waiting to happen, another name to add to the long list of victories, like T first. Nothing challenges that belief. They cross the Euphrates, push into Mesopotamia, take a few cities, secure positions, and for a moment it looks easy, almost too easy, but what Crassus does not realize is that the enemy is not avoiding him out of fear. The enemy is watching, waiting, learning his movements, and preparing the ground. Because the Parthians do not rush in a battle. They shape by T.by the time the campaigning season continues. Crassus is deeper in unfamiliar territory, and that is when the warnings begin. Local allies advise him to take a different route, to move through Armenia where the terrain would protect him, where cavalry would be less effective. But Crassus refuses, either out of pride or impatience, or the simple belief that Rome does not need to adapt. So instead, he leads his army into open land, flat, dry, endless, at a place where there are no natural defenses, no cover, no advantage for heavy infantry, that a place built for movement, that a place built for Parthia. And somewhere out there, moving almost invisibly across that vast space, is the man who will define this battle, Surinna. Young, not yet weighed down by age or caution, but already known for his intelligence, his presence, his ability to turn war into something precise, controlled, almost theatrical. He does not bring a massive army. He does not need one. What he brings is speed, coordination, and a deep understanding of how to break an enemy without ever letting them fight the battle they want. When the two forces finally meet near Carrhae in 53 BCE, the contrast is immediate. On one side, the Roman army, solid, structured, built around infantry formations that have crushed enemies for generations. On the other, the Parthians, almost entirely mounted, light horse archers and heavily armored cataphracts, moving constantly, never fixed, never offering a clear target. The battle begins not with a charge, but with distance. The Parthian horse archers spread out, circling, their movement wide and fluid. And then the arrows begin T first. The Romans hold steady. They form tight. Defensive formations, shields locked together. The famous testudo, a shell designed to protect against incoming projectiles. And for a moment it works, but the arrows do not stop. They keep coming, again and again and again, because Surinna has planned for this. Behind his lines, camels carry endless supplies of arrows, moving with the army, ensuring that the rain never ends, and slowly something begins to change. The Romans are not losing in a sudden, dramatic way. They are being worn down, step by step, minute by minute. They cannot reach the enemy. They cannot force a close fight. They can only endure, and endurance has limits. Crassus realizes he needs to break the pattern, to force the Parthians into a real engagement. So he makes a decision that he sends his son, Publius Crassus, young, brave, eager to prove himself, leading a force of cavalry to drive the Parthians back, to disrupt their attack, to create an opening. For a moment, it looks promising. The Parthians begin to pull away, retreating, falling back, and Publius follows, faster, further, too far, because the retreat is not reeled is the Parthian shot turned into strategy that allured at a trap. As the Roman cavalry stretches out, separate from the main force, the Parthians turn. Suddenly, the wide open space becomes a cage. Horse archers close in from all sides, arrows striking relentlessly, cutting down men and horses, breaking formation, creating chaos. And then, when the moment is right, the cataphracts charge, heavy, armored, unstoppable in that instant. They slam into what remains of the Roman force, crushing it completely. Publius fights, tries to rally his men, tries to hold something together, but there is no holding this. Not here, not like this. And when the end comes, it is not heroic. It is inevitable. He takes his own life rather than be captured. And Surinna understands what this means. Because this battle is not just physical.it is psychological.so. He takes Publius' head, mounts it on a spear, and sends it back toward the Roman lines. When the Romans see it, something breaks. Not immediately, not all at once, but enough to change the outcome. Because now this is no longer just a battle they're trying to win.it is a nightmare they're trying to survive. The arrows keep falling. The sun burns overhead. Water runs low. The wounded pile up. And still, they cannot reach the enemy. Night finally comes, but it does not bring relief. Only exhaustion, fear, confusion. Crassus tries to retreat, to pull his army back towards safety, toward carry, but discipline is slipping. Units become separated in the darkness. Men get lost, formations dissolve, and by morning, the army is no longer a unified force that it is fragments. Surinna knows this, and he does not rush. He offers something else, a meeting to negotiation. A chance, he claims, to end this without further bloodshed. Crassus, desperate, exhausted, with what remains of his army barely holding together, agrees that it is a final gamble point, one last attempt to salvage something from disaster. But even here, control slips away. The meeting turns tense, then chaotic, then violent, and in the confusion, Crassus is killed. Some say it was planned. Some say it was accidental. Some say he resisted. But in the end, it doesn't matter, he is dead. And with him, the campaign dies too. What follows is not a retreat. It is a collapse. Out of the 40,000 men who crossed into Parthian territory, tens of thousands are dead. Thousands more are captured, marched far into the east, never to return home. Only a fraction escaped. And for the first time in a long time, Rome does not control the story. This is not a difficult victory. This is not a costly success. This is defeat. Cleared, undeniable, humiliating an entire Roman army. Destroyed not by a larger force, not by a stronger empire in the traditional sense, but by a different way of fighting, a different understanding of war, and the impact spreads far beyond the battlefield in Rome. The news hits like a shockwave. Crassus has gone point, one pillar of the fragile balance of power between him, Pompey, and Caesar. Removed, and when balance disappears, conflict follows, because now there are only two left, and they're already drifting toward war. Meanwhile, in Parthia, victory does not lead to expansion. Surinna, the architect of it all, does not live long enough to enjoy it. He is executed, likely because his success made him too powerful, too admired, too dangerous in the eyes of his own king. And so, even in victory, Parthia turns inward. But something has changed, something permanent. Rome has learned that it can be beaten. And Parthia has learned that it can do the beating. The Euphrates is no longer just a boundary. It is a scar. And scars have a way of being remembered. The desert does not forget what happened at Carrhae, but Rome tries to move on, not because it has healed, but because it has no choice, because the kind of wound Carrhae inflicted is not just military. It is political. And in Rome, political wounds spread faster than anything on a battlefield. Crassus is gone, and with him, the fragile balance that held together the most powerful men in the Republic begins to crack, because what once stood as three is now only two. And those two, Pompey and Caesar, are not meant to share power forever. First. Nothing explodes immediately. There's still distance, still hesitation, still the illusion that things can hold. But underneath, tension builds, alliances shift, loyalties tighten, and slowly, inevitably, Rome begins to turn inward. Carrhae fades from daily conversation, not because it is forgotten, but because something even bigger is coming. Civil war in 49 BC, Julius Caesar crosses the Rubicon, and that single act, simple in movement but enormous in consequence, tears the Republic apart. Now Rome is no longer thinking about Parthia, no longer thinking about the East. It is thinking about itself, about survival, about power, about who will control everything. Pompey flees east, gathering forces, trying to regroup, turning the same regions that had just seen Roman expansion into a final stage for Roman conflict. And for a moment, It seems almost ironic. The East, once a frontier, now becomes the place where Rome will decide its own fate. The decisive battle comes at Pharsalus in 48 BC. Caesar wins. Not easily, not without risk, but decisively enough that Pompey's position collapses and Pompey runs again, further, seeking refuge in Egypt. But there is no safety left for him. He is murdered upon arrival, betrayed before he can even step fully onto shore. And, just like that, another giant of Rome is gone. Back in the East, Parthia watches all of this carefully. They remember Carrie. They remember how Rome bled in the desert. And now they see something even more dangerous for Rome: division. Because an empire divided is weaker than any army you can face in the field. But Parthia does not rush. It does not immediately invade, does not throw everything westward. Because it understands something important: Rome, even divided, is still dangerous, still capable of turning quickly, still unpredictable. Instead, Parthia waits that it stabilizes itself, that it deals with its own internal struggles, its own noble families, its own fragile balance of power, and it watches as Rome continues to reshape itself through blood. Caesar rises, becomes more than just a general, more than just a political figure. He becomes something close to absolute. And for a moment, it looks like Rome might finally settle, might finally unify under one dominant figure. But Rome is not ready for that. Not why in 44 BCE, Caesar is assassinated. Not by enemies from outside, but by men within the Senate, men who believe they are saving the Republic, men who believe they are stopping a king before he crowns himself. Instead, they unleash chaos again. And this time, it is worse because now there's no clear center, no single dominant force. Only competing claims, shifting alliances, rising figures trying to take control of something that refuses to be controlled. Mark, Antony, Octavian. The names begin to rise. And while they maneuver, while they gather support, while they prepare for yet another internal struggle, something unexpected begins to form in the East at a bridge between worlds that were never meant to align. His name is Quintus Labienus, once a Roman, once loyal to Pompey, that a man shaped by Rome's wars, trained in its methods, loyal to its ideals, until those ideals collapse around him. After Caesar's victory, Labienus does not return to Rome. That he does not accept defeat. That he leaves. And he goes east. Parthia first. It seems like exile, like the story of a defeated man disappearing into the margins. But is not that simple, because Labienus does not go east to hide, that he goes east to continue the fight. And Parthia sees value in him immediately, because he understands Rome, that he knows its tactics, its weaknesses, its mindset, that he is something rare, that a Roman against Rome. And for the Parthian king, Oro II, this is more than an opportunity. It is a chance to turn Carrie from a single victory into something larger, that a shift, that a reversal. Labienus is not just welcomed, he is empowered, given troops, given authority, given a role that should not exist. A Roman general leading an Eastern army against his own people. And for the first time since Carrie, Parthia begins to move west again. Not cautiously, not slowly, but decisively, because now the conditions are perfect. Rome is divided. Its leaders are distracted. Its armies are not unified, and the memory of Carrie still lingers like a shadow. In 40 BC, the Euphrates is crossed again. But this time, it is not Rome stepping into Parthia. It is Parthia stepping into Rome. And at the front of that advance rides a Roman. When the Parthian army crosses the Euphrates in 40 BCE, it does not feel like a raid. It does not feel like a test. It feels like something far more dangerous, something deliberate, something prepared. And at the front of it rides a man who knows exactly where Rome is weakest. Labienus does not hesitate, because hesitation would waste the advantage he has been given. And right now, Rome is not ready. Its attention divided, its leadership still forming after Caesar's death, its eastern defenses thin, scattered, uncertain. The attack is fast, brutal in its speed, not in drawn-out battles. but in collapse, because the Roman positions in Syria are not built to withstand something like this. Not in their current state, not with the confusion of leadership and the lack of coordination between forces. Cities begin to fall, not always through siege, but through fear, through calculation, through the understanding that resistance might mean destruction, and that perhaps this new force, this strange combination of Parthian strength and Roman leadership, is not something they can stop. Apamea falls. Antioch follows. The great cities of Syria, once secure under Roman control, begin to slip away one after another, and with each loss, the illusion of Roman dominance in the east weakens. Labienus moves like a man reclaiming something that was taken from him, not just leading an invasion, but rewriting his own story, turning defeat into revenge, exile into power. And as he pushes further into Asia Minor, it begins to look like Rome is not just losing ground, it is unraveling at the same time. Another force moves south. Pacorus, the son of the Parthian king, leads a separate army into Judea, supporting local uprisings, installing a ruler favorable to Parthian interests, reshaping the political landscape without needing to destroy it completely. It is coordinated. It is effective. And for a moment, everything tilts from Syria to parts of Anatolia, from the Levant to the edges of Roman influence. Parthia stands not as a distant rival, but as a dominant force inside what used to be Roman territory. And what makes it even more dangerous is this: it is not just Parthia doing it. It is Parthia guided by someone who understands Rome. Labienus knows how Roman governors think. He knows how Roman armies respond. He knows where they are slow, where they are overconfident, where they are stretched too thin. And he uses that knowledge perfectly. This is not carry. This is not a single battle. This is something broader. A wave. And Rome is not ready for it. Back in the West, Mark Antony begins to understand the scale of the problem. But he is not in a position to respond immediately. His attention divided, his priorities scattered between politics, alliances, and his growing connection to Egypt. Instead of going himself, he sent someone else, not the most famous, not the most celebrated, but perhaps the most important man for this moment. Publius Ventidius. He is not the kind of general people talk about before the war begins, not the kind of name that inspires immediate confidence. But he has something that matters more than reputation, that he understands timing, and he understands restraint. When Ventidius arrives in the east, he does not rush into battle. He does not try to immediately reclaim everything that has been lost, because that would be exactly what Labienus expects. Instead, he waits. He studies the situation. He watches how the Parthian forces have spread out, how their success has stretched them thin, how their rapid advance has created gaps. Because momentum can be dangerous, not just for the side losing it, but for the side gaining it. And when the moment comes, Ventidius strikes, not everywhere, not all at once, but precisely. He targets Labienus first, cuts him off, forces him into a direct confrontation. And this time, the balance is different. Labienus, for all his knowledge, for all his success, is no longer operating with surprise on his side. And when the Roman legions finally meet him in a controlled battle, the advantage shifts back. He is defeated, captured, executed. A Roman who turned against Rome ends like so many others who lost. And just like that, one half of the invasion collapses. But the war is not over, because Pacorus still holds the east, still commands a powerful force, still represents the real strength of Parthia. Ventidius turns carefully, deliberately, that he does not chase recklessly into open plains like Crassus once did. He chooses his ground, chooses his moment. And when the two forces meet near Mount Gindarus in 38 BCE, the battle is different from Carrhae in one critical way. The Romans are ready. They take the high ground. They force the Parthians to attack uphill, breaking the advantage of their cavalry, disrupting their momentum, forcing them into a fight they do not want. And when the moment comes, the Roman counterattack is decisive, disciplined, relentless. Pacorus is killed, and with his death the invasion ends. The Parthian forces retreat, back across the Euphrates, back into their own lands. And just like that, the tide turns again. Rome regains Syria. restores control, rebuilds its frontier, and for the first time since Carey, it feels like balance has returned. Not dominance, not complete victory, but balance. And what makes this moment so important is not just that Rome wins, it is how it wins. Not through reckless ambition, not through overextension, but through patience, through understanding, through learning from past mistakes. Ventidius does something rare in Roman history after such a victory that he stops. He does not push deeper. He does not try to conquer Parthia. He does not repeat the mistakes of Crassus. He restores the border and holds it. And for a moment, it seems like Rome has learned, that it understands now, that the Euphrates is not just a line to be crossed whenever ambition demands it, but that moment does not last forever. Because in Rome, there's always someone who believes they can do more. Someone who believes they can succeed where others stopped. And that someone is Mark Antony. For a brief moment after Ventidius restores order, the eastern frontier breathes, not peacefully, not comfortably, but steadily like a man recovering after a long illness. And it is in that moment of recovery that Mark Antony begins to think not about stability, but about glory, because Antony is not a man built for quiet borders. He's a man who stood beside Caesar, who saw what conquest could do, who understands that in Rome, victory is more than military success. It is power, legitimacy, legacy, and right now, he is not alone at the top. Octavian is rising in the west, careful, controlled, patient, and Antony knows that if he does not achieve something greater, something undeniable, he will fall behind. His eyes turn east. Parthia. The one enemy Rome has not defeated. The shadow of Carey. And this time, he tells himself it will be different, because Antony does not go blindly like Crassus. He prepares, he studies, he builds alliances, and most importantly, he does not go alone. He secures the support of Armenia, bringing King Artavasdes II into his plan, promising coordination, support, a united front that will prevent the kind of isolation that doomed previous campaigns. And behind all of this, there is another presence shaping his decisions, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Not just a partner, not just a symbol, but a strategist, a ruler who understands power as deeply as any Roman. And together, they begin to imagine something larger than just a campaign, an Eastern Empire, a fusion of Roman and Egyptian strength, a counterbalance to Octavian in the West. But for that vision to become real, Antony needs victory, a clear one, a decisive one. In 36 BCE, he moves. And the scale of this campaign is massive. 16 legions, thousands of cavalry, siege engines, supplies stretched across vast distances. This is not a raid. This is not a test. This is an attempt to break Parthia completely. First, everything seems to go according to plan. The army advances, pushing deep into territory that few Roman forces have entered in such strength. But the deeper they go, the more familiar the pattern becomes. The land stretches, distances grow, supply lines thin, and the enemy does not meet them directly. Because the Parthians remember too. They remember Carey. They remember what works. Instead of offering Antony the battle he wants, they do something else. They follow, they watch, they harass. Small attacks on the edges, strikes against supply lines, constant pressure without full commitment. And slowly, the weight begins to build. Antony pushes toward a key objective, the city of Frospa, believing that taking it will force a decisive outcome, that capturing a major stronghold will break the Parthian resistance. But reaching the city is only the beginning, because sieges require time, they require stability, they require supply, and Antony has none of those things secured. Then comes a moment that shifts everything. His Armenian ally withdraws. Artavasdes II, seeing the situation change, seeing the strain, seeing the risk, decides to pull his forces back, whether out of fear, calculation, or simple survival instinct. It doesn't matter. What matters is this: Antony is now alone, deep in hostile territory, with an army that is strong but exposed. And the Parthians see it immediately. They intensify their attacks, targeting what matters most, not the legions directly, the supplies, the siege equipment, the ability to continue to at one point. A sudden strike destroys a large portion of Antony's siege engines, equipment that took immense effort to transport, to protect, to position, gone in a single moment of vulnerability. And without them, the siege collapses. Antony cannot take the city. He cannot force a victory. And now he faces the same choice that has haunted Roman generals in the east before him. Continue forward and risk total destruction, or retreat, and accept failure that he chooses to retreat. But retreat in this land is never simple, because the Parthians do not let go. They follow, they strike, they wait for weakness. And the Roman army begins a long, brutal withdrawal through harsh terrain, through cold, through hunger, through constant pressure that never fully breaks them, but never lets them rest either. Day after day, step after step, men fall behind, supplies run low, morale fractures, and Antony, to his credit, does something different from Crassus. He does not separate himself from his army. He walks among them, shares their suffering, endures the same conditions, trying to hold something together not just through command, but through presence. And that is the only reason this does not become another carry, because despite everything, the army survives, not intact, not victorious, but alive. That be why the time they reach safety, tens of thousands are gone, lost not in one catastrophic moment, but in a slow, grinding collapse. And everyone understands the truth. This was not victory. This was escape. Antony returns not to Rome, but to Alexandria, to Cleopatra, to a place where he can reshape the narrative, where he can present the campaign as something heroic, something noble, something that nearly succeeded. But the reality cannot be fully hidden. Rome has tried again, with more preparation, with more force, with more knowledge, and still Parthia stands, unconquered. And in Rome, far away from the deserts and mountains of the east, Octavian watches, carefully, because Antony's failure is not just a military setback. It is political. It is an opening. And soon, the conflict between them will decide not just the fate of Rome, but the future of everything that comes next. That be why the time Antony's eastern ambitions collapse, the shape of the Roman world is already changing, not slowly, not quietly, but decisively, because the struggle between Antony and Octavian is no longer something that can be balanced or delayed. It has to end. And when it does, it ends completely. The final moment comes at Actium in 31 BC, a battle not in the deserts of the east, not on the plains of Mesopotamia, but at sea, where fleets clash and the fate of Rome is decided not by legions marching, but by ships burning. Antony loses, Cleopatra flees, and what remains of their power dissolves soon after. That be why the time the dust settles, Octavian stand alone, not just as the winner of a civil war, but as the master of Rome. And soon, he takes a new name, Augustus. It sounds simple, almost modest, but behind it lies something entirely new, because Rome is no longer truly a republic, not in the way it once was. Power is no longer shared in the same fragile, competitive way. It is centered now, controlled, directed, and Augustus understands something that many before him did not. Rome cannot keep bleeding like this, not endlessly, not through constant war, not through reckless ambition in lands that refuse to be conquered, especially not in the East, because the East has already taught Rome its limits, carried at Antony's retreat. Years of conflict with no lasting victory. Augustus makes a different choice. He does not prepare a massive invasion. He does not gather legions to march beyond the Euphrates. Instead, he prepares something quieter, more controlled, more calculated. Diplomacy, but not weak diplomacy. Not passive negotiation. This is something sharper, because Augustus knows that even without war, Rome still holds power, influence, leverage, and he's going to use it. The center of his effort is something that has haunted Rome for decades. The standards the eagles lost at Carrie, they're not just objects. They are symbols of defeat, of humiliation, of the moment Rome was broken in the desert, as long as they remain in Parthian hands, that memory remains alive, and Augustus wants to change that, not by reclaiming them in battle, but by forcing their return this time. Parthia is not at its strongest. Its king, Phraates IV, sits on a throne that is far from secure, his rise to power marked by blood, by betrayal, by the kind of internal instability that weakens even the strongest kingdoms, and Augustus sees it clearly. Because Parthia may have defeated Rome in battle, but it is not unbreakable. Instead of attacking, Augustus begins to apply pressure. Slowly, carefully, he receives Parthian exiles, rival claimants to the throne, men who could, if supported, turn Parthia against itself. He does not immediately use them. He does not rush that. He simply makes it known. Rome has options, and Parthia understands a message. Because internal threats are often more dangerous than external ones, that a Roman army can be fought, that a civil conflict can destroy everything. Talks begin. Envoys move back and forth across the Euphrates, not as enemies, meeting before battle, but as rivals negotiating something both sides need: stability. And then in 20 BCE, something remarkable happens. Not on a battlefield, not in a siege, but on a bridge at a neutral space, suspended between two worlds. Roman and Parthian representatives meet, watched by soldiers, watched by history. And there, without a fight, without blood, the Parthians return the standards lost at carry point one by one. That the eagles that have been taken in victory are handed back, not seized, not stolen, given, and in that moment, Augustus wins. Not in the way Crassus tried to win, not in the way Antony tried to win, but in a way that reshapes the story entirely. Because back in Rome, this is not presented as compromise. That it is presented as triumph, that a victory of honor, that a restoration of dignity. Temples are built, coins are minted, images spread across the empire showing Parthians bowing, returning what was once taken. The narrative is clear. Rome has been vindicated, and for most people, that is enough, because perception matters as much as reality. But beneath the surface, the truth is more complex. Rome has not conquered Parthia. It has not marched into its heart. It has not broken its power. What it has done is something different. It has learned. Learned when to push, when to stop, when to fight, and when to let pressure do the work instead. For Parthia, the decision is just as calculated. Returning the standards is not submission to it, is strategy. A way to avoid Roman interference. A way to stabilize the throne. A way to buy time. Because time is often more valuable than pride. And as part of this exchange, something else passes between the two empires. Something small, almost unnoticed at first. A gift. A woman. Her name is Musa. Rome. She is just part of the diplomacy, not a gesture, a token. But in Parthia, she's going to become something far more dangerous than any army. Because sometimes the most powerful changes do not come from war. They come quietly, from within. And by the time anyone realizes what she is doing, it will already be too late. The exchange between Rome and Parthia ends without blood. The standards are returned, the border holds, and for the first time in a long while, the East feels stable, not peaceful, but steady. And in that stillness, something small slips through unnoticed, something that does not look like power, does not sound like threat, does not carry the weight of armies or banners. A woman sent as part of diplomacy, a gift, a detail. Her name is Musa. First, she is exactly what she appears to be, a Roman woman brought into the Parthian court, placed among many others, expected to exist quietly within the structure of a royal household. But Musa does not remain small. She does not remain unnoticed, because power in a court like this is not always taken by force. Sometimes it is built slowly, word by word, moment by moment. Phraates IV, the king of Parthia, is not a secure ruler. His path to the throne was marked by violence, by eliminating rivals, by navigating the dangerous politics of noble families who hold their own power and influence. And men that are always surrounded by uncertainty, always aware that loyalty is temporary, that threats can come from anywhere. And Musa understands this. She does not rush. She does not push too hard. Instead, she moves carefully, gaining trust, positioning herself close enough to matter, but not so visible that she becomes a target too early. And over time, that position becomes something stronger. Influence. Real influence. Not declared, not official, but present in decisions, in conversations, in the quiet shaping of what the king begins to believe. And then something happens that changes everything. She has a son. Phraates is half Roman, half Parthian. And from that moment on, Musa's ambition sharpened, because now this is no longer just about survival inside the court. Now it is about the future, about power that can extend beyond her own position, about a throne that could belong to her child. But Parthia does not pass power simply to it is not a system of clear inheritance. It is a system of rivalry, of competing claims, of brothers, sons, relatives, all capable of becoming king if they gather enough support. And that makes Musa's path dangerous, because her son is not alone. There are others, older, stronger, more accepted by the Parthian elite that she does something that looks like diplomacy, but is actually strategy. She convinces Phraates to send his other sons to Rome as hostages at a gesture of goodwill, that a sign of trust between empires. And on the surface, that is exactly what it is. Augustus receives them, sees it as confirmation that the relationship with Parthia is stable, that influence is working, that the East is under control without war. But beneath that surface, something else has happened. The competition is gone. The rivals who could challenge her son are no longer in Parthia. They're far away in Rome. And now, the path is clearer. Musa's influence grows stronger, no longer just close to the king, but shaping the structure around him, shaping who remains, who matters, who has access to power. And slowly, almost invisibly, she moves from participant to controller. Then comes the final step. Phraates disappears in great battle, in public overthrow, in dramatic collapse. Just absence, most likely poisoned, quietly removed. And when that happens, there is no chaos, no struggle, because everything has already been prepared. Musa and her son take the throne together, an arrangement that should not exist, a Roman-born woman ruling Parthia, the king whose blood ties him to both worlds. Coins are minted showing both of them, side by side, a visual statement that this is not temporary, not accidental. This is power shared, power claimed, power established. For a brief time, Parthia is stable, not because of overwhelming strength, but because of control. Musa understands the court. She understands the balance between noble families. She understands how to keep Rome satisfied while maintaining independence. There are no major wars during her rule, no large-scale conflicts, because she does not need them. She holds power in a different way. But power like this is fragile, because it does not come from tradition. It does not come from acceptance. It comes from disruption, and disruption always creates resistance. The Parthian nobles begin to turn, not immediately, not openly at first, but slowly, through whispers, through rumors, through the kind of quiet opposition that grows until it becomes something impossible to ignore. They question her. They question her son. They question the legitimacy of a ruler shaped by Rome, influenced by Rome, connected to Rome. And then the rumors become sharper, darker. Stories begin to spread. Accusations of something unnatural between Musa and her son, whether true or not. It does not matter, because in politics, perception is enough that it weakens them, undermines them, gives their enemies something to rally around. And eventually, it breaks. 4 CE. They are overthrown, removed, erased from power as quickly as they rose into it. Another ruler takes the throne. The system resets. And just like that, one of the strangest chapters in Parthian history ends. But it leaves something behind, that a realization that Rome does not need to conquer Parthia to influence it, that power can move across borders without armies, that the East is not just a battlefield, it is a game, and both sides are learning how to play it. Because even though the border holds, even though no massive war erupts during this period, tension does not disappear. It shifts. It waits. And as the years move forward, new rulers rise, new pressures build. And once again, the question begins to return. Who controls the East? Not just in territory, but in influence that I in Armenia, that I in trade, that I in the flow of power between worlds. And soon, a new name begins to emerge from Rome, not as a conqueror, not as a reckless general, but as something more controlled, more careful, that a man sent not to wage war, but to hold it back. Germanicus. The Parthian borders had quieted, but the East remained a tinderbox. Rome had learned lessons from failed wars, and Parthia had learned the limits of influence. Into this delicate balance stepped Germanicus, a man whose name alone carried expectation, prestige, and the shadow of Augustus. He was not sent to fight, but to manage, to oversee a relationship that could easily unravel. That he arrives in the East with the dignity of Rome behind him, yet the subtlety of a strategist who knows that brute force is no longer the only tool of empire. His presence signals Rome's commitment to stability, but also reminds Parthia that the empire watches, that the games of succession and diplomacy are always under scrutiny. His role is delicate. Respect the king, appease the nobles, observe the movements of governors, and ensure that the flow of tribute and trade continues uninterrupted. Germanicus quickly realizes that the Parthian court is a labyrinth of ambition and suspicion. Every decision, every gesture, every word has weight. He watches as rulers come and go, as alliances form and collapse quietly, often before they are even noticed by the untrained eye. And he understands that the real power is not in armies or gold. It is in perception. A ruler who looks secure, a king who seems legitimate, can maintain order even if his position is built on fragile foundations. At the same time, Rome has its own vulnerabilities. Augustus' health is declining. The succession question looms, and Germanicus must balance diplomacy in the East with the delicate politics of home. Every Parthian gesture is a signal, every treaty a potential spark. One misstep could ignite conflict that neither side is prepared for. The months pass, the borders remain stable, and a fragile peace settles. Not because the two empires trust each other, but because they recognize mutual benefit. Trade continues. Armies are garrisoned. Messages flow along the great roads connecting east and west, and Germanicus quietly cements relationships that will determine the balance of power for years to come. Yet even in this calm, tension simmers beneath the surface. Noble families in Parthia still plot. Factions rise and fall, and whispers about loyalty, betrayal, and Roman influence circulate in every corner of the court. Germanicus knows the peace is temporary, like the shadow before a storm. But for now, Rome's influence is secure, Parthia's borders hold, and the East, though unpredictable, remains in equilibrium. In this chapter of history, wars are avoided not by the might of armies, but by the skill of observation, the art of negotiation, and the subtle, unspoken understanding that influence can be as powerful as conquest. The stage is now set. Parthia has recovered from internal disruption. Rome has asserted its presence without bloodshed, and the East waits, tense and watchful, as new players emerge and new conflicts loom on the horizon. The story of the Parthian Empire is far from over. What follows will be about diplomacy, intrigue, and the slow building of tensions that could explode into war at any moment. The calm of the East was fragile, a veneer stretched thin over centuries of tension and ambition. With Augustus gone, the empire had passed to Tiberius, a ruler cautious by nature, more interested in maintaining order than in chasing glory. Yet even the most careful emperor cannot ignore the restless East. Across the Euphrates, Parthia remained a kingdom of potential chaos and opportunity. Internal succession disputes, noble factions, and a new generation of ambitious rulers ensured that the stage was never truly quiet. It'd be why the early 1st century CE, a new Parthian king, Vologases I, had risen to power. Unlike some of his predecessors, he was shrewd and politically astute, understanding that the survival of Parthia depended as much on diplomacy as on the mastery of cavalry and archers. Yet he also understood the Roman temperament, the desire for prestige, for revenge, for symbols of honor. And so, The first act of his reign was to consolidate power at home, ensuring that noble houses who might have sought to challenge him were either placated or neutralized. Patience was his weapon, observation his ally. Meanwhile, Roman attention had returned eastward, as it always did when Parthian affairs stirred unrest. The legions stationed in Syria were disciplined and ready, and governors like Gaius Caesar, Augustus' grandnephew, moved with authority. Rome's goals were clear: maintain influence, protect the trade routes, and prevent any Parthian ruler from projecting power across the Euphrates. The memory of past defeats, like Carrhae and the failed campaigns of Antony, still haunted Rome, and generals knew that rash decisions could invite catastrophe. Vologases, observing the Roman posture, understood that direct confrontation would be costly. Instead, he opted for subtle provocations. In Armenia, a kingdom long caught between East and West, he installed his brother as king, a move that both solidified Parthian influence and tested Roman tolerance. Rome protested, naturally, but there was no immediate response. Tiberius and his advisors were unwilling to risk another disaster in unfamiliar terrain. The message was clear: Parthia would assert its influence where it could, and Rome would not always intervene. As the years passed, tension simmered. Trade caravans moved across Mesopotamia, spies and envoys traveled constantly, and every political gesture, from the choice of a royal marriage to the granting of a governorship, carried weight. Rome and Parthia were locked in a silent chess match, each watching the other, measuring ambition, calculating risk. Open war was avoided, not because either empire lacked the strength, but because both understood the price. Yet, beneath this surface calm, the ambitions of men and the volatility of borders ensured that the next spark could ignite flames no one could control. It was during this time that Germanicus returned to the east, dispatched to oversee matters in Armenia and Parthia. Unlike his first mission, this visit was not ceremonial. It carried real strategic importance. Roman officials, envoys, and soldiers all looked to him for guidance, aware that the balance between peace and conflict rested on subtle decisions. Germanicus had to navigate the ambitions of Vologases, the rivalries of Armenian nobles, and the always present scrutiny of Roman senators. His approach was methodical, relying on presence, negotiation, and the occasional show of force without triggering open battle. Through careful diplomacy, he prevented Parthia from overreaching while maintaining Roman prestige. Gifts were exchanged, hostages kept in respectful custody, and letters sent across borders with painstaking wording. Every detail mattered. One misinterpreted phrase could undo months of painstaking negotiation. And while the East remained outwardly calm, rumors of intrigue and secret plotting abounded. Patrician families whispered about allegiances, generals argued over strategy, and spies reported on the movements of both Roman and Parthian forces. But even in this delicate equilibrium, the foundations of conflict were being laid. The Armenians, loyal yet opportunistic, chafed under Roman oversight. Parthian nobles, proud and ambitious, sought ways to expand influence into client kingdoms. And Rome, constrained by politics at home, knew that a future confrontation with Parthia was not a question of if, but when. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the East awaited the next act in this centuries-long contest. This period, while calm compared to the fury of Carrhae or the invasions of Labienus, was crucial. It allowed both empires to rebuild, to consolidate, and to prepare. And it was in this slow, tension-filled peace that the lessons of the past, humility, patience, and strategy, were learned. Both sides knew that the next clash, when it came, would test not just armies, but the very resolve and cunning of rulers, who could shape empires with their choices. By the early 2nd century CE, the delicate balance between Rome and Parthia had shifted. Rome had endured internal turmoil, leadership changes, and frontier pressures, but under Emperor Trajan, a new energy coursed through the empire, a mixture of ambition, military genius, and a hunger for glory. Trajan, unlike his cautious predecessors, looked east with a vision of conquest. He saw in Parthia not just a rival, but a prize, vast wealth, fertile lands, and the chance to secure Rome's eastern frontier once and for all. Vologases and his successors were no strangers to the looming shadow of Rome. They had learned that diplomacy alone could delay, but not prevent Roman ambition. When Trajan began his preparations in 113 CE, gathering legions, supplies, and intelligence along the eastern provinces, Parthian spies and envoys moved constantly, trying to anticipate his next move. Armenia, always the flashpoint between empires, became the first theater. Rome's advance was swift and overwhelming. Trajan crossed the Euphrates with an army trained in both siegecraft and rapid maneuvering. Cities that had once resisted the legions fell, sometimes after brief sieges, other times surrendering outright to avoid destruction. Yet Parthian resistance was not negligible. Cavalry units, skilled archers, and fortified positions slowed the Roman advance, and ambushes and desert passes reminded Rome that the East was not easily tamed. Vologases' successors, though politically shrewd, faced a dilemma: meet Rome in open battle and risk catastrophic losses, or retreat and preserve forces for guerrilla-style resistance. They often chose the latter, harassing supply lines, ambushing detachments, and forcing Rome to commit resources far beyond initial expectations. The campaign became a grueling test of endurance, strategy, and logistics, a contest not just of armies but of wills. Trajan, undeterred, pushed deeper into Mesopotamia, reaching the heartlands of Parthia. Cities like Ctesiphon and Seleucia, jewels of commerce and culture, felt the weight of the empire's ambition. Roman engineers rebuilt roads, erected forts, and established supply depots, creating a network that could sustain prolonged occupation. For a brief moment, it seemed that Parthia itself might be absorbed into Rome's grasp. Monuments were raised, triumphs were imagined, and historians in Rome already wrote of the empire's eastern conquest. Yet, as history often shows, conquest is never permanent. Disease, overextended supply lines, and the indomitable will of local populations eroded Roman control. Parthian nobles fomented rebellion. Armenian factions resisted occupation, and even Rome's allies began to question their loyalty under foreign rule. By 116 CE, Trajan's forces faced mounting difficulties. Desertions, uprisings, and logistical nightmares threatened the stability of the newly claimed territories. Trajan himself, relentless and determined, pressed on. He pushed toward the Persian Gulf, aiming to link the Euphrates and Tigris under Roman control, imagining a corridor of wealth and strategic advantage. But the campaign strained the empire's resources and tested the patience of the Senate back in Rome. Within a few years, Trajan's untimely death in 117 CE forced his successor, Hadrian, to reassess the empire's eastern ambitions. Where Trajan had sought expansion, Hadrian favored consolidation. Rome withdrew from overextended territories, focusing on fortifying borders rather than chasing distant glory. For Parthia, this was a reprieve. Though the Romans had penetrated deep into Mesopotamia, the empire survived, resilient and adaptable. New leaders restored authority, rebuilt cities, and strengthened defenses, learning from the mistakes of their predecessors. The eastern frontier had witnessed the might of Rome, but it had endured. This era, filled with ambition, war, and strategic brilliance on both sides, underscored a truth both empires could not escape. Power was fleeting, and even the strongest armies could not subdue a culture, a land, or a people determined to resist. The Roman-Parthian frontier remained a crucible of history, where generals, kings, and emperors tested their skill, and where the lessons of patience, resilience, and adaptation were written in blood, stone, and fire. By the early 3rd century CE, Parthia's centuries-old dynasty had begun to crumble. Centuries of intermittent warfare with Rome, internal strife, and the centrifugal forces of provincial nobility had weakened central authority. The Arsacid kings, once formidable rulers of an empire stretching from the Euphrates to the Indus, faced rebellions from within and incursions from beyond. The fabric of Parthian power was fraying, and a new force was rising from the east. The Sassanids, a family claiming descent from the ancient Achaemenid kings, determined to restore Persian glory. Ardashir, a minor regional ruler in Persis, was the architect of this revival. Charismatic, intelligent, and ruthless, he built alliances with disaffected Parthian nobles, consolidating power in the southern regions of the empire. Unlike the often fragmented Arsacid rulers, Ardashir enforced strict central authority, reorganized the army, and invested in infrastructure, including roads and fortified cities, to project power quickly. His vision was clear: a unified Persian empire that could rival Rome, stronger, more centralized, and more resilient than the old Parthia. Conflict between the decaying Parthian state and Ardashir's rising forces became inevitable. Skirmishes turned into pitched battles, and in 224 CE, the decisive confrontation occurred near the city of Hormozgan. The Arsacid king, Artabanus V, commanded a vast but disorganized force, relying on traditional cavalry archers and regional levies. Ardashir, by contrast, wielded a disciplined army with cohesive units, heavy cavalry, and innovative tactics that leveraged both mobility and firepower. The battle was brutal. Arrows darkened the sky, horses thundered across the plain, and the cries of warriors echoed for miles. When it was over, Artabanus V lay dead, and the Parthian Empire, fractured and leaderless, dissolved into regional fiefdoms. Ardashir proclaimed himself Shahanshah, King of Kings, signaling the birth of the Sassanid Empire. He swiftly moved to consolidate control, absorbing Parthian territories and asserting authority over rebellious nobles. Unlike the Arsacids, he sought not just survival, but revival. Zoroastrianism became a unifying ideological tool, and state institutions were strengthened to withstand both internal rebellion and Roman incursions. Rome, now under the Severan dynasty, observed these developments cautiously. The eastern frontier, once dominated by Parthian power, was now in flux. Skirmishes between Rome and the Sassanids began almost immediately, but this was a different enemy, centralized, ambitious, and ideologically driven. Early campaigns revealed that the Sassanids combined Parthian military traditions with new strategies: heavy cavalry, fortified cities, and rapid communication that made them a formidable opponent. Under Ardashir and his successors, the Sassanid Empire would grow into a true rival of Rome, capable of launching campaigns deep into Mesopotamia, Armenia, and even Syria. Cities like Ctesiphon, which had seen Roman triumphs under Trajan, became the nerve centers of Sassanid power, adorned with palaces, temples, and fortifications. Trade flourished under the new empire, but so did tension, as Rome and the Sassanids entered a cycle of conflict, diplomacy, and uneasy truces that would define the region for centuries. The fall of Parthia and the rise of the Sassanids marked a turning point in Near Eastern history. Where Parthia had been a loose confederation, vulnerable to internal rebellion and external threats, the Sassanids were a disciplined, centralized state, driven by ideology, ambition, and a desire to restore the glory of Persia. Their rise was not merely a political shift. It was the rebirth of Persian civilization, poised to challenge Rome repeatedly and shape the cultural, religious, and military landscape of the region for the next 4 centuries. With the Sassanid Empire firmly established under Ardashir and his successors, the Eastern world entered a period defined by relentless rivalry with Rome. Unlike the fractured Parthians, the Sassanids were united, disciplined, and ideologically driven. From their capital at Ctesiphon, the kings of Persia projected authority over Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the Iranian plateau, while Rome, ever vigilant, could not ignore a power that rivaled its wealth, armies, and prestige. Early clashes along the Mesopotamian frontier tested both empires. Ardashir launched raids into Roman territories, capturing fortresses, taking prisoners, and demonstrating that the Sassanid army was more than a successor to Parthian cavalry. It was a sophisticated war machine. Heavy cavalry, disciplined infantry, and fortified supply lines allowed Ardashir's forces to strike quickly and withdraw before Roman reinforcements could respond. Rome, under the Severan dynasty, initially underestimated the Sassanids, assuming that old Parthian weaknesses persisted. They soon discovered the error of this assumption. Under Ardashir's son Shapur I, the Sassanid challenge escalated dramatically. Shapur was a brilliant strategist and ambitious ruler, intent on restoring the glory of ancient Persia. He mounted large-scale campaigns into Roman-held Mesopotamia, capturing key cities and inflicting humiliating defeats on Roman generals. One of the most striking episodes occurred during the campaigns of 260 CE, when Shapur decisively defeated the Roman Emperor Valerian, capturing him alive, a humiliation Rome had not endured in centuries. Valerian's capture sent shockwaves through the empire, demonstrating that the Sassanids were not merely raiders. They were equals to Rome in strategy, organization, and ambition. The frontier regions, Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the Levant, became contested battlegrounds. Cities like Edessa, Nisibis, and Hatra witnessed cycles of siege, conquest, and recapture. The Sassanids built formidable fortifications, while Roman emperors reinforced legionary positions. Diplomacy intertwined with warfare. Alliances with local rulers, bribes, and propaganda campaigns were as crucial as swords and arrows. Both empires sought not just territorial gains, but prestige and legitimacy. Victory over the other was a statement of divine favor, military prowess, and imperial superiority. Culturally, the Sassanid rise had a profound impact. Zoroastrianism became a state religion, with temples and fire altars dotting cities, promoting ideological cohesion. Arts, literature, and architecture flourished under royal patronage, creating a distinct Persian identity that contrasted with Rome's cosmopolitan Mediterranean culture. Trade along the Silk Road, previously disrupted by Parthian fragmentation, revived under Sassanid protection, enriching cities, supporting armies, and spreading Persian influence into India, Arabia, and Central Asia. The Sassanid-Roman rivalry was cyclical, with neither side able to achieve lasting dominance. Battles were fought, treaties signed, and borders shifted, but the underlying competition endured. The Sassanids, however, had advantages Rome often lacked: centralized authority, cultural cohesion, and the ability to rapidly mobilize elite cavalry. Their empire became a resilient counterweight, ensuring that for centuries, the Eastern Mediterranean world was shaped not by Rome alone, but by a Persian empire that demanded respect, provoked fear, and inspired admiration. By the late 3rd and early 4th centuries, the Sassanids were no longer simply challengers. They were architects of an enduring Persian revival. Their campaigns against Rome, their administrative reforms, and their cultural projects solidified an empire capable of surviving centuries of internal and external pressures, a testament to the vision of Ardashir and the ambition of his successors. The stage was set for an epic contest between two of history's greatest powers, where every battle, treaty, and city became a symbol of imperial destiny. By the time Khosrow I, also known as Anushirvan, ascended to the throne in 531 CE, the Sassanid Empire had matured into a formidable and highly organized state, a true superpower of its era. Ardashir and Shapur had laid the foundations, but Khosrow transformed Persia into an empire that was both militarily unbeatable and culturally magnificent. Every province, from the sun-baked deserts of Arabia to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia and the mountains of Armenia, was meticulously administered. Taxes were standardized, trade flourished along the Silk Road, and a sophisticated intelligence network kept the emperor informed of threats before they became crises. He understood that the Sassanid strength was not just in the cavalry charges or siege engines, but in the empire's cohesion, organization, and culture. That Khosrow's vision extended beyond borders. It was ideological. Zoroastrianism became more than a religion. It became a unifying force. Fire temples were constructed in cities and towns, where priests educated the populace not only in religious doctrine, but also in law and literacy, fostering a sense of identity and loyalty. Scholars, Poets and philosophers thrived under royal patronage, producing works in medicine, astronomy, and literature that would echo through the centuries. Cities like Ctesiphon, Gunshaper, and Ray became hubs of knowledge, rivaling the intellectual centers of Byzantium. Hospitals, libraries, and academies were built, turning Persia into a beacon of learning. Yet, it was the military rivalry with the Byzantine Empire that defined much of Khosrow's reign. The eastern frontier had long been a zone of tension, and Khosrow approached it with both cunning and ambition. He launched campaigns that struck deep into Byzantine territory, capturing key fortresses and imposing heavy tributes, while maintaining strict control over his own borders. Unlike his predecessors, Khosrow did not rely solely on brute force. He understood the art of strategy. His generals coordinated with intelligence networks, using terrain, timing, and psychological warfare to their advantage. Armies moved with precision, supply lines were protected, and spies gathered critical information about enemy movements. One of the most famous episodes was the long and grueling Byzantine-Sassanid War of 572 to 591 CE, which epitomized the intense back and forth between the two empires. Cities changed hands multiple times. Amida, Dara, and Constantinople's eastern approaches were theaters of bloody sieges, while local populations endured the devastating consequences of war: famine, conscription, and forced migration. Khosrow's forces, however, remained disciplined and resilient. They deployed heavy cataphracts, expert archers, and fortified strongholds, ensuring that even when retreating, the Sassanids could regroup and counterattack with devastating efficiency. Economically, the empire under Khosrow thrived despite constant warfare. Persia controlled lucrative trade routes connecting India, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. Luxury goods, silk, spices, precious metals flowed into Sassanid cities, enriching merchants and funding the military. The empire's wealth allowed Khosrow to commission monumental architecture, from grand palaces in Ctesiphon to bridges and canals that improved agriculture and communication across vast territories. Persian artisans produced textiles, metalwork, and ceramics that became highly prized even in Byzantium, spreading Persian influence beyond mere conquest. Culturally, the Sassanid Golden Age under Khosrow was also a time of synthesis. The empire absorbed influences from Mesopotamia, India, and the Hellenistic world, fusing them into a uniquely Persian civilization. Music, literature, and philosophy flourished. Scholars translated Greek, Sanskrit, and Syriac texts into Middle Persian, preserving knowledge that would later feed the Islamic Golden Age. Khosrow himself was remembered as a patron of learning and justice, earning the title Anushirvan, Immortal Soul, for his vision of an empire that was strong, fair, and enlightened. Yet despite these achievements, the shadow of Rome, or rather Byzantium, loomed ever large. Every victory was met with counterattack, every treaty with suspicion. The frontier was never peaceful. Generals like Belisarius in the Byzantine army met Persian armies in battles that would become legendary for strategy and valor. Both empires were locked in an eternal struggle of attrition, each seeking to prove its superiority while avoiding overextension that could threaten its survival. To be why the end of Khosrow's reign, Persia had reached a peak of power and sophistication unmatched in its history. It had built an empire that was culturally rich, economically vibrant, and militarily formidable. But the very strength of the Sassanid state also meant that the stakes of war were higher than ever. Each clash with Byzantium tested not only swords and shields, but the resilience of the empire's social, economic, and cultural structures. Khosrow had created a legacy that would influence Persia for centuries, a model of governance, military prowess, and cultural achievement that became the standard against which all future rulers would be measured. And yet, even at the zenith of Sassanid power, the stage was being set for challenges that no sword, no diplomacy, and no ideology could fully prepare them for: new enemies, internal strife, and the inexorable tide of history that would one day sweep away the old world of empires, leaving only the stories, cities, and monuments behind. The golden age of Khosrow, faded into memory. The Sassanid Empire faced challenges that no amount of wealth, scholarship, or military might could easily overcome. Successive rulers lacked the vision, discipline, and cunning of Anushirvan, and cracks began appearing in the empire's formidable edifice. Internal strife, succession disputes, and overextended frontiers left Persia vulnerable, and the empire's once unified provinces started to simmer with discontent. Nobles and satraps, empowered by centuries of relative autonomy, often pursued their own interests, undermining central authority. The bureaucracy, once a model of efficiency, became bloated and corrupt. Meanwhile, the treasury, stretched by decades of costly warfare with Byzantium, began to show strain. By the early 7th century, Persia's eastern and western borders were under constant pressure. The Byzantines, revitalized under emperors like Heraclius, struck back with renewed vigor. Battles that once showcased Persian dominance now revealed logistical weaknesses, poor coordination, and the limits of cataphracts in the age of protracted sieges. Yet, even as Persia struggled against external enemies, a far more transformative force was emerging on the Arabian Peninsula. The rise of Islam in the early 7th century introduced a movement both spiritual and militarily dynamic, uniting the previously fragmented Arab tribes into a force with unparalleled mobility, ideological cohesion, and ferocious determination. Early victories in the deserts of Arabia gave the nascent Muslim armies confidence and momentum, and their raids soon extended into the borderlands of the Sassanid Empire. Cities that had been bastions of Persian administration, such as Al-Hira and Ctesiphon, found themselves confronted by enemies who combined religious zeal with extraordinary tactical flexibility. The Sassanid military, trained to fight set-piece battles and sieges, struggled against opponents who moved swiftly across deserts, avoided prolonged engagements when unfavorable, and struck with precision. The Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, 636 CE, became a turning point. The Sassanid forces, though larger and heavily armored, were outmaneuvered by the Muslim army's agility and strategic ingenuity. Persian cataphracts, once feared across the known world, found themselves bogged down in muddy fields, their weight and discipline turning into liabilities against the nimble cavalry of the Arabs. Cities fell one after another. Ctesiphon, the magnificent capital that had symbolized the empire's power, was sacked and occupied. The fall was not just military, but psychological. Centuries of imperial authority and cultural dominance seemed to collapse almost overnight, yet the Sassanids did not surrender easily. Princes and generals retreated to the eastern provinces, rallying what forces they could, attempting to regroup in Persia's rugged mountains and fortified cities. Nishapur, Ray, and Istakhr became centers of resistance, where noble families and military commanders held out, hoping to reclaim the empire's glory. But the combination of internal dissent, depleted resources, and relentless Arab campaigns made revival nearly impossible. Each battle, each siege, eroded the cohesion of the empire further. Even when Persian forces achieved small victories, they were temporary, tactical successes in a war whose momentum had irrevocably shifted by the mid-7th century. The Sassanid Empire was effectively in its death throes. Yazdijerd III, the last emperor, became a fugitive, moving from province to province in a desperate attempt to rally support. His court, once a glittering center of culture, philosophy, and administration, became a mobile shadow of its former grandeur. He appealed to local nobility, sought alliances with Byzantium, and even attempted to raise mercenary forces, but the empire's foundations had eroded too far. Every year saw fewer troops, shrinking coffers, and more territory slipping beyond Persian control. The fall of the Sassanids was not merely a military catastrophe. It marked the end of an era. Persia's cities, once shining examples of architecture, science, and art, were transformed under new rulers. Yet many elements of Sassanid culture persisted. Persian administration, bureaucratic sophistication, legal principles, and artistic traditions were absorbed into the expanding Islamic caliphate. Scholars who had worked in Sassanid academies became influential in the new Islamic centers of learning. The legacy of Zoroastrian thought, Persian literature, and monumental architecture echoed into centuries to come, shaping the civilization that replaced the empire. In the end, the Sassanid Empire fell not because it lacked strength, innovation, or vision, but because history had brought forces beyond even a great empire's control. The rise of Islam, combined with internal decay and relentless military pressure, transformed Persia forever. From the ruins of palaces, fire temples, and city walls emerged a new world, one that would carry forward the Sassanid achievements in unexpected forms, blending the old and the new into a civilization that would endure and evolve for centuries. The sun set on a 400-year dynasty that had once rivaled Rome, ruled with brilliance, and left a legacy of power, culture, and intellect unmatched in the ancient world. Persia's story was ending, but its influence was just beginning, seeding the civilizations of the medieval Middle East and beyond with knowledge, artistry, and governance that would echo through history. Even as the Sassanid Empire crumbled under the relentless advance of Arab forces, the soul of Persia refused to vanish. Cities like Ctesiphon, Nishapur, Ray, and Astakar, though scarred by war, still harbored scholars, artists, and engineers who carried the knowledge of centuries. Zoroastrian priests, once guardians of sacred texts and complex rituals, adapted their teachings or went into exile, while Persian administrators found new roles under the expanding Islamic Caliphate, ensuring that the meticulous bureaucratic systems of the Sassanids survived in a transformed form. The Islamic conquest, rather than erasing Persian identity, fused it with new ideas, creating a cultural renaissance that would define the Middle East for centuries. Persian scholars began writing in Arabic, but infused their work with Persian thought, philosophy, and scientific methodology. The libraries of Baghdad, Basra, and Kufa became centers of learning where Persian mathematicians, astronomers, and physicians taught alongside scholars from across the empire. The work of Al-Khwarizmi, whose roots traced back to the Persian intellectual tradition, laid the foundations of algebra, while physicians built upon Sassanid medical texts to advance the understanding of anatomy, pharmacology, and surgery. Architecture, too, became a living bridge between past and future. The grandeur of Sassanid palaces, the soaring arches of Ctesiphon, the intricate carvings, the geometric sophistication was not lost. Arab builders adopted Persian engineering techniques and combined them with Islamic aesthetic principles, producing iconic structures such as the domed mosques of Isfahan and the palaces of the Abbasid Caliphate. Persian art, including miniature painting, metalwork, and textiles, infused Islamic culture with intricate beauty, creating a visual language that blended myth, religion, and royal symbolism. Literature thrived, carrying echoes of Sassanid storytelling into the Islamic world. Epic tales, poetry, and philosophical treatises preserved Persian history, legend, and moral philosophy, influencing generations of writers. Works like the Shahnameh, composed centuries later by Ferdowsi, would immortalize the heroes of Persia's past, ensuring that the Sassanid legacy remained alive in the hearts of the people long after their political power had faded on the political stage. Former Persian administrators became vital to the new caliphates, guiding governance with their experience in taxation, law, and diplomacy. The model of centralized authority combined with regional autonomy, perfected under the Sassanids, allowed Islamic rulers to govern vast territories effectively. Persia's lessons in empire building, statecraft, and cultural patronage were thus woven into the fabric of a new civilization, ensuring that even in defeat, Persia remained a cornerstone of regional power and intellect. The fusion of Persian tradition with Islamic thought eventually gave rise to the Islamic Golden Age, a period where science, philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and art flourished at unprecedented levels. Persian scholars were at the forefront of translating Greek, Indian, and Sassanid texts, synthesizing knowledge into works that would later influence Europe during the Renaissance. The elegant scripts, meticulous scientific observation, and poetic richness of this era owed much to the cultural foundations laid under the Sassanids. Even ordinary life retained traces of the old empire. Zoroastrian festivals, agricultural techniques, irrigation systems, and artisan guilds continued to shape daily existence. Merchants traveled the Silk Road using routes established during Sassanid times, spreading goods, ideas, and innovations across continents. The empire may have fallen, but its networks, cultural, intellectual, and commercial, remained active, sustaining Persia's influence far beyond its political end. In essence, the Sassanid Empire did not disappear with the fall of Ctesiphon or the exile of Yazdijerd III. It transformed, embedding its ideals into a new civilization that merged Arab, Persian, and broader regional elements. Persia's legacy became the hidden engine of a vibrant, evolving world, a civilization that would leave an indelible mark on history, from the bustling markets of Baghdad to the grand libraries of Cairo, from the observatories of Samarkand to the palaces of Cordoba. The fall of the Sassanids had ended an empire, but it had also seeded a future. A future where the brilliance of Persian thought, governance, art, and science would illuminate the world for centuries, proving that even in defeat, greatness could endure, adapt, and inspire. As the dust of conquest settled over Persia, the remnants of its civilization did not fade into obscurity. They radiated outward, seeding innovation, culture, and governance across the Islamic world. The Arab conquerors, while politically dominant, quickly recognized the value of Persian expertise. The administration of the sprawling caliphate relied heavily on the bureaucrats, tax collectors, and diplomats who had once served under the Sassanids. Roads, canals, and irrigation systems designed centuries earlier continued to support agriculture and trade, allowing cities to flourish where empires had risen and fallen. Persian engineers and architects guided the construction of palaces, mosques, and bridges, blending traditional Sassanid techniques with emerging Islamic aesthetics, producing the first glimpses of the magnificent Islamic architecture that would later define regions from Baghdad to Samarkand. In the realm of knowledge, Persia became a bridge between civilizations. Scholars trained in Zoroastrian academies now worked in Arabic, translating and preserving Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and earlier Persian scientific texts. Astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy flourished, with names like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and Al-Khwarizmi, all steeped in Persian intellectual heritage, pioneering discoveries that would resonate for centuries. Algebra, algorithms, and astronomical observations that were refined in Persian observatories laid the groundwork for scientific revolutions far beyond the Middle East. Libraries in cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba became treasure troves of knowledge, where Persian manuscripts influenced scholars across the Islamic world and eventually into Europe. Culturally, Persian identity persisted in art, literature, and daily life. Poets preserved stories of kings and heroes, tales of love and justice, and philosophical reflections on existence and morality. Epic storytelling, such as that captured in the Shahnameh, kept the memory of ancient Persia alive, reminding generations of the grandeur, valor, and wisdom of their ancestors. Persian miniature painting, textile design, and metalwork inspired artisans across the Islamic world, creating an enduring aesthetic language. Even courtly manners, ceremonial traditions, and systems of etiquette in Islamic courts bore unmistakable Persian influence. Trade, too, became a conduit for Persian legacy. Merchants traveling the Silk Road carried not only silk and spices, but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices that originated in Persia. Cities like Samarkand, Bokhara, and Ray became bustling hubs where Persian merchants and scholars exchanged knowledge with Chinese, Indian, and Mediterranean traders. Techniques in irrigation, astronomy, mathematics, and medicine spread along these routes, embedding Persia's intellectual fingerprints across continents. By the time the Abbasid Caliphate reached its zenith in the 9th and 10th centuries, Persian influence had permeated nearly every facet of governance, scholarship, and culture. Persian administrators ran the bureaucratic machinery. Persian scholars wrote foundational scientific and philosophical treatises, and Persian artistic styles shaped the visual and decorative arts. Even the Arabic language of administration and scholarship was infused with Persian terminology and conceptual frameworks, evidence of the deep synthesis between the two civilizations. Beyond the Islamic world, the echoes of Persia would extend to Europe. Through translations from Arabic into Latin during the 12th century, Persian contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy reached the minds of European scholars. Concepts like zero, algebraic equations, surgical techniques, and astronomical calculations, all refined by Persian thinkers, would catalyze the Renaissance centuries after the fall of the Sassanids. In effect, Persia's intellectual and cultural legacy became a silent architect of global progress, shaping empires and civilizations that would rise far from its ancient borders. Even ordinary life bore traces of Persia's enduring imprint. Agricultural practices, urban planning, irrigation networks, and artisan guilds preserved centuries-old Sassanid techniques. Zoroastrian festivals evolved, sometimes blending with Islamic traditions, maintaining cultural continuity. Persian influence was both subtle and profound, an invisible thread connecting past empires to future societies that, in the end, Persia's story was not just about a fallen empire. It was about transformation. The Sassanids may have lost their crowns, but their civilization's ideas, art, science, and governance survived, merged, and thrived in new forms. Persia became the hidden foundation upon which the Islamic Golden Age and later the European Renaissance were built. Its legacy demonstrated that even in defeat, culture, intellect, and creativity could endure, ripple outward, and shape the course of history for millennia to come. Centuries passed, and Persia, though scarred by conquest after conquest, never truly vanished. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century swept across its cities with unprecedented ferocity, leaving ruins in places where once majestic palaces, libraries, and observatories had stood. Baghdad, Isfahan, Ray, and countless smaller towns were reduced to rubble, and a shadow of despair fell over the land. Yet even as fire and steel tore through its urban centers, the spirit of Persia endured, not as political power, but as culture, knowledge, and identity that refused to be extinguished. Survivors rebuilt amidst the ruins. Scribes rescued manuscripts from the ashes. Scholars fled to safer regions carrying knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Artisans reconstructed mosques and palaces, blending old Persian designs with the artistic currents of their new times. In villages, families continued centuries-old agricultural practices and preserved local traditions, ensuring that the rhythms of Persian life survived even when empires crumbled. From these ashes, a remarkable cultural synthesis emerged. The Timurid dynasty, centuries later, would rise on the ruins of past empires and sponsor a renaissance of Persian art, architecture, and scholarship. Samarkand became a jewel of the world, its madrasas, observatories, and gardens bearing the unmistakable mark of Persian creativity. Calligraphy, miniature painting, carpet weaving, and poetry flourished anew, carrying the same ethos of beauty, precision, and intellectual depth that had defined Persia for millennia. Even the Persian language proved immortal. It became the language of administration, culture, and literature across Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, far beyond the original borders of the Sassanid Empire. From the courts of the Mughal Empire in India to the palaces of the Ottoman Empire and the libraries of Samarkand, Persian served as a vessel of identity, a bridge linking generations of thinkers, poets, and visionaries. Its words preserved stories of kings, heroes, and sages, allowing the memory of Persia to travel across continents and centuries. The resilience of Persian civilization was perhaps most visible in its philosophy and worldview. Its emphasis on justice, wisdom, the beauty of creation, and the pursuit of knowledge became threads woven into the fabric of countless societies. Persian thinkers, poets, and scientists continued to shape the intellectual currents of the world long after their cities had been sacked, proving that cultural and intellectual legacy often outlives the rise and fall of kings and empires. Ultimately, the story of Persia is a story of endurance. From the towering palaces of the Achaemenids to the courts of the Sassanids, through Arab conquest, Mongol devastation, and Timurid revival, Persia's essence never faded. Its civilization was never truly conquered because it existed not only in territory or armies, but in ideas, art, knowledge, and human spirit. Every book, every poem, every invention carried forward the flame of a people who understood that empires may fall, but culture, wisdom, and creativity are immortal. The last echoes of Persian history remind us that legacy is measured not by borders drawn on maps, but by the enduring influence one civilization leaves on the world. Persia's light, once thought dimmed by conquest and ruin, shines even today. In literature, art, science, architecture, and the very languages we speak. Its story ends not in silence or defeat, but in the quiet, unstoppable pulse of culture that continues to shape humanity itself. The end.